Morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Spell. And I'm Ed Hubbard at the Pagan. Today I'm going to talk to you about spiritual warfare that's been on everybody's mind lately and been on the lips across the pagan world and the community. And it's also inside the Christian world right now. It has become a very interesting note. Once again, we're talking about the world of spiritual warfare. What is spiritual warfare? It is the idea that the god or gods intervene to bring in conflict to favor one side over another, and that they give us tools. Uh, they've given us tools, i.e., spiritual weapons, to fight this war. So have you been hearing about it lately? So the idea of it is, I grew up with spiritual warfare, and that basically, uh, let's make it very simple. Okay, let's go ahead and get this started. Spiritual warfare, they basically are coming at you with the idea of a Christian concept of this idea of fighting supernatural or preternatural evil beings. And yet they say that this has always been here. We've always had this element of fighting off spirits. We've had this as there. Good morning, Samantha, or good afternoon. We've always had this idea of the conflict, of the idea of one must fight a war. One must fight a conflict with spiritual beings for the possession or the duration or the focus of the human being or species or race. We hear this story all over and over again. It is the idea that our world is permeated with demonic or devil forces. It is the idea that nature itself is diabolical, evil, wicked, and that this has been a war against that natural world, that spiritual world which they see as natural. So Mother Nature is spiritual, and yet the mathematics of that Christian, that sort of capitalistic faith that we've now seen today, is that a tree has no value until it's cut down, or what it produces on the farm. A tree in the forest has very little value. Started to have some carbon credits, but that's only recently. So the idea of the forest, of the nature, of all of this is set with they call it preternatural or supernatural or demonic or spiritual or energetic, or you can use 1,000 names, energies, and that these energies are disruptive to the human species. We talk about the Fae, we talk about all this. But in Christianity, there is this concept of spiritual warfare, that the world is coming at you at all times. The supernatural is coming at you all times. Everything is trying to take you away from being involved with heaven. And really, what it means is that they use it as a system, and people who practice it in Christianity use this to fight this idea of change. And so they use it all the time. So today, we're now seeing it being used by Christian warriors who are using these set prayers that have been existing for 1,000 years, over 2,000 years. They've done this over and over again. This is not a new idea, of this idea of permeating the forces, and then they do prayers. And these prayers strengthen the core of their group. Why do you send out apostles into the world? Why do you send out missionaries into the streets of Chicago, the major cities? You've seen it, Jehovah's Witness, all of them. Why do they do that? It isn't to have the individual actually convert people, but it is to show them how rare they are, how individualized the group is, how specialized it is, and to allow them to become wounded so that the group can heal. Remember, if you're being sent out into the street to evangelize, it's because they're using it to butter you up, to brutalize you, to break you, and to actually find ways to bring you into a different type of space so that they can make you feel better, more whole. And that's the idea of it. So that's really why you send them out into the streets. Not to convert people, maybe make a few dollars, hand out a few Bibles, but to get them to see how rare they are and how rare the group is. Isn't that interesting? So the idea of recruitment is that you find people who are broken and broken in just those same ways that you are, and then you put them together, and you go out and you send them out to the world to show them how broken they still are, and how they all are, and then they find out that in your group they will solace you, they will give you strength, they will give you energy, and then they will do something very important. They will recruit you into their spiritual conflict, us versus them. And they will do this through a number of means. Remember, first they break you, they show you that you're unique, only they are going to help you, and then they bring you into your war because guess what? When you have an enemy, you are much more likely to stay with the group. So first you're broken, and then you're brought into the group. But what is spiritual warfare directly? It is a series of energetic attacks brought to you through symbolic actions, through prayer, through symbolism, through things that they wear, through other things like one of the biggest places I'm thinking about is like Jesse Penn Lewis, War on the Saints. And basically, he was a very prolific author who contained a lot of these instances, if not explicitly using the expression. He did do that. And what he kind of said was he was really anti saint in a lot of ways. And so he would attack them, he would bring them. But this idea of prayer, this idea of visualizing the exercise. So, what is spiritual exercising? Let's really talk about it. And it is about visualization, energy, manipulation, and to focus that energy and manipulation against another individual. We know how this works, and they've been doing this for a long time. But they don't call it spell work. They call it spiritual warfare. These are the tools and the weapons of the Lord. The spear of justice. They make up the sword of righteousness. And over the long run, one of the things that makes it that, so you have the breastplates with the 12 amethyst stones. Oh, that's a beautiful imagery from the Bible. And they put themselves as the heroes protecting people against an enemy that they don't fully comprehend. And through their various types of exercises, through their energies, through their ideas, they can then bring those enemies down. That they will bring first a protection to themselves so they cannot be touched. So they are really good into protecting the homeland, protecting the space, protecting the church, protecting the family. I am the rock. And so spiritual warfare starts at the big place of being we're the rock, we're the strong ones, and that we will be defended against all enemies. And then making that aspect, realizing that they have all these enemies against them. They may have made those enemies. Well, let me be honest with you, some of them are really harsh that way, but that's what they do. So now, how does this come to pagans? Check into the chat room, talk to me, say anything you like. But one of the biggest things that you do see happen is that threat. So let's say there's nothing, this is all just role playing at a maximum scale. So they go into their places and they cast their energies and their spells. And we cast our spells and they all conflict together. And nothing much seems to happen for some reason. There might be some subtle answers, some subtle places, but at the end of the day, nothing much seemed to have happened. This is where spiritual warfare gets dangerous. It advocates for the escalation or the de-escalation or the loss of taking it from the high ground to the low ground, to the soil. And that means taking a gun and shooting people, taking violence, creating a war, creating conflicts, making a sword, making a shield. So the danger of spiritual warfare is it's constantly speaking this action. And when you don't get those results from God, then somebody will eventually say, God told me we have to take it into our own hands. We have to go ahead and commit acts of violence. So first you ask for protection and acts of violence by spirit against your enemy, and then eventually it gets down into acting in your own way. And so that's the danger, and we're starting to see that emerge. And so that's creates the suicide bomber, the wild child who shoots up a school, you know, the jihadi bomber, the kamikaze pilot. All of these things are a deliberate act of spiritual warfare where you think that the very life of your nation is there. Oh, yes, Jesse. Yeah, terrorism. I mean, terrorism is fundamental. A lot of religious terrorism is based on this idea of spiritual warfare that expands. And remember, it expands into being the Crusades. It expands into being the war against drugs was a spiritual war. It was warfare. Churches were being indoctrinated. We must fight the world. We must fight the country. So they used prayers and moments of support and moments of hatred, all sorts of different ways to make degrade the individual drug users, the individual people who are seeking a release, as we know, finding the way of the new world, and that they were then allowed to commit physical acts of violence, such as putting them in the hospital, putting them in the jail, putting them away, for their own spiritual good. The war of drugs was never about being good to us as citizens or being good to us to try to protect us. Because if they did that, then they would have had medical help. They would have had condolences and consoling prayers, and they would have tried to talk us out of it, right? They would have done, wouldn't have put us in jail, they would have put us in hospitals. And if they found us selling drugs, they would just take it away and say, don't sell it, instead of trying to put us in jail and fine us. There could have been a lot of things they could have done to show love, attention, emotion. But this war against drugs was a spiritual war against the demon drugs, the devil, the demon. That was made very clear, and they amped up and utilized political power against their enemies. So remember, spiritual warfare is really a very big way for them to create these sort of ideas where they're allowed to attack a group of people because they've been identified as demonic, diabolic, and once they get there, they are the enemy and they're allowed to do a lot of things. Fortunately for us, in the United States, there's a limit to what they've been allowed, but that's now deteriorating. Okay. So from a pagan point of view, when we talk about spiritual warfare, we're really talking about a different thing. We're talking about the way that gods battle, the way that we battle in the world, how we conduct ourselves. Spiritual warriors inside of us is how we conduct ourselves in the world, and how do we do this in a strong, often positive light of being affirming to our communities, to be in there in our communities. Because our communities doesn't tolerate bullies. I mean, you could say big warriors, oh yeah, we're spiritual warriors, great. Are you going to help us do the laundry? Well, yeah, okay, I'll do that, or I'll help us cook our food. Or will you hunt for food? You're not just allowed to create conflict or fight an enemy. You have to do value to the community. It's a larger context. Being a warrior is bonjour, is a much larger area, and people forget that. We're now talking about ethics. We're talking about ideology of protection, of training, of being, and so that we do that, and then we can see ourselves putting on our armor. We can see ourselves putting on our helmets. We can see ourselves carrying the spiritual energy forward, as well as sometimes physical. So the difference between the two sides is really, where is that context? For most spiritual warriors of the pagan types of faith, we see it as a way to be, to have an ethic, to be a way to carry yourself into protecting and keeping people stronger, healthier. How to do so? I consider myself a spiritual and a pagan warrior. I'm a paladin general, so obviously I believe that for myself. But it isn't about using it against others or that sort of thing. And I believe in psychic tools. So we're going to go ahead in this last aspect. So one of the things that pagans, Wiccans, witches, magicians, psychics, all of us have that are on the diabolical side, as you would be in the spiritual warfare, are the ones that are anti. Well, we'll add to our latest is our lesbian, gay, trans, binary uh, groupings that we have, the drags queens, the trans people, the everybody else who is basically not part of the spiritual warfare groups, not in a straight community, old American Christianity, Christian nationalism, everybody else. So welcome aboard. And what we do is we have psychic tools, and this is what disturbs them. We have psychic tools that work on the psyche, and that's what they're afraid we're using. They're afraid that at some level we're going to change their minds. We're changing their kids' minds, they're changing their grandchildren's minds, and they're afraid that their minds are going to be changed. And ultimately, this is the reflection that pagans, the Satanists are doing a good job of it now. Even other faiths like Hinduism and that threaten the core belief of the spiritual warfare. And that's what you're calling out to protect that final step of the belief. There's only one true God, and that God is all powerful, and I must believe in them or I will go to hell. That's a very powerful set of tools. And from there, they are afraid of that world collapsing, that in some way people can live their lives without this type of God and have good lives. And that's hard. So what they use is spiritual warfare to protect themselves, to try to bring them into a tighter group. And they are hoping that this is an energetic explosion, and it will be, of energy that will take out their enemies, that in some way they will bring in supernatural beings such as angels. They will bring in supernatural beings such as devils to fight or to be on their side to fight against all the other devils. I mean, they've got lots of irrational thought goes in there. But here's how it works at the core: we're going to get together. We're going to form a mastermind. So it doesn't matter what side of the fence you are. If you're creating a form of spiritual warfare, either where. Hi, Robert the cat. Um, that's what you do. You gather together this very simple concept of a mastermind. We're all going to focus on this one thing at the same time. We're going to call on the one entity. Are we going to be there? And so we're having fun. So we're going to go ahead and concentrate on one entity, one being, one time. So there you go. And so you call that together. Everybody that you got in your group, you call it together and they focus on it. And from that moment, that becomes an egregor or a mastermind or a group mind, because there's a lot of names for it. You begin then pouring your energy into it. And at first, in spiritual warfare, they usually call on, maybe we blessed, maybe we protected, maybe we guarded. And then you come into the disgruntles. Let us, let our enemies fall. And then you name your enemies, you name your enemies, and you name your enemies. And at that point, you're hoping that you're asking for an intervention. And intervention comes in. Usually they don't have it. If somebody's better at it, they visualize it. Let us carry our spear. Let us carry our weapon. Let us carry our chest. Let's carry our cup. Let's carry all the things. So they create these visualized objects in which you can carry. And then sometimes they will go out and protest. That energy gets built up, and you feel like you're really well armed, and then you go out and you protest. You take that and you go press. You got them all hyped. You got them all hyped on that energy. The adrenaline's going, the cortisol's going. We got them. We got them visualizing their weaponry and everything else, and we know this makes a positive effect. We know that in positive, if you visualize with sports, you have improvements. So they visualize themselves as these warriors. So there you go. And so they keep organizing it and trying to strive to get into it and into it. And now, at least recently, they can take then political gains and other gains and sort of this movement and say, we are spiritual warriors to continue this process. It's only when this process breaks down where they can't win that someone will take it on to become a physical warrior and cross that line. Hi, Jim. Agreed. Organization is key. The reason spells and workings don't avail against the previous administration is Christians are working their spells too, and they have organized. Yeah. So there's we go. And this idea of natural laws and everything else. You remember, I'm not sure we're not all LARPing the entire universe. That we didn't start 70,000 years ago playing a game called Human. What this human civilization looks like, and we're not just LARPing, and that all these forces in the cosmos that we're talking about just react to us. But we do know that this idea of spiritual warfare. So where does this impinge on the pagans? So they're going to get energized. They're going to come out and they're going to protest our events, and they're all going to be preset to be aggressive, to be angry, to be ready to take out the enemy, and to see you in the worst possible light. So the biggest part of spiritual warfare does it switches the paradigm so that you are now viewing the enemy as they've chosen it. Now, it could be witches. Oh, we're casting spells and we're all too sexy. A big one. We're all too sexy. That we're after all their husbands and wives. No, we don't want your husband and wife. We have plenty of our own people. Um, that, yeah, we want our children. Not really. Their children want some explanations from us. We're happy to give it to them, but we are not after children. As we know, we've got all of these things that we're after, but that paradigm of spiritual warfare, that creating of the nucleus, getting everybody to come and invest in it, protect and get your energy, have a projectile weapon system around you, then already needs an enemy. It's required to have an enemy. It has to have an enemy for it to maintain. Period. It just does. Isn't that ridiculous? But it does. Because if the enemy doesn't present us, they go watching a 5 mile army and don't get challenged, that energy is going to diminish. Those weapons are going to diminish. That feeling of unity is going to diminish. It's only through the feed of amygdala and fear and anger does that energy grow. So, spiritual warfare at its core is about keeping the energy, the high vibration of anger, of fear, and of self joy in the group. Yeah, I will. I will talk to that. Yes, I feel um, that is out there. So that's what it feeds on. They're mentioning QAnon, which I studied for years. I mean, it started out as a video game, and it's gotten into the wellness communities and the medical communities. Oh, sure. But then, pagan communities, metaphysical communities, occult communities, because they so lightly populated and they're so fascinating and they titillate people. You go into a bar and you tell them, "Oh, I'm an occultist." What do you mean you're an occultist? Oh, I'm a practitioner of magic. I study the occult forces. I speak to ghosts. I do whatever it is that you do. You will find them at one. Some people will be afraid, but for the biggest part, people will be fascinated because anyone who is willing to take on the boldness of the universe is that. QAnon was a video. It was the start. It was a role playing game thing. It just got out of control. It's true. It's a real truth to that. People have studied it. It was 4chan, 8chan. Oh my god. But what it did is it took feedbacks of certain key elements. QAnon on purpose, and they basically uh, on purpose started taking key elements and key conspiracies, and people started building them to explain things. And eventually, Steve Bannon got a hold of them, and a lot of people got a hold of them, and they began creating all these conspiracies. Um, and yeah, Jim saying to Gwendolyn, agreed. I've always been amazed how far the left and the right can loop back and believe the same conspiracies. Yes, just from different points of view. Conspiracies are really easy to understand because they give very complex answers that become really super simplified to complex problem. And it takes away the idea of chaos. Remember, everything about spiritual warfare, of everything about this, is about control. So let me talk about. Oh, let me get some Coke today, Diet Coke, Coke Zero, actually. Yeah, they aren't paying me a royalty yet for mentioning it. Someday. Uh, okay. We've also got in our own community where we're starting to see these people using the threat or the idea that spiritual warfare is coming into play. Uh, that they are believing that they're being attacked. And we have, as much as Christians have this sort of, we're victims, but we're attacking victims because we're attacking you before you make us victims. We have a very martyrish, a very benevolent, a very kind sort of way, but we don't push back oftentimes. And so we become really easy to be strawmen and get into trouble before we know it. But one of the things it does, it feeds our amygdala, and it's very easy to get followers, people to come after you when they're afraid. Hey, I'm going to be hearing the big jabby jab thing, and if you back me up, I'll go jabby jab whatever it is that you want. You think I'm being so overly simplistic, but I'm not. That's exactly the mechanism we've had for a very long time. You with a jabby jab stick, will lead us if you're willing to use the jabby jab sticks to protect us. And then you find out there's really nothing to protect you. Oh, that's just a small little animal, small little plant, small little whatever, small little spirit, small little whatever. But we say, yes, we'll continue to protect you as long as we can. That's a terrible thing. And we feed the stories that will make them afraid to allow us to use our jabby jab stick or our weapons or whatever it needs. And somehow, some of those weapons are psychic. Now, pagans have all sorts of psychic weapons. But tonight, I'm going to tell you if you really do believe that on the other side they are practicing and they're using psychic tools, here's one of the things you can do. Why don't you go look into your guards and wards? If you don't know what it is, look it up. We have it at witch school. We have lots of places, but pick up your guards and wards and figure out ways to put sigils and protection around you. If this is as we think it is, and the way I do believe it is, and I saw today they were talking about the quantum state of magic. Yes, magic is entering into the lexicon officially, slowly but surely, of quantum physics. That we're going to go ahead and see more of that. But here we go. It is as you visualize. So visualize and use sigils and wards to visualize and begin protecting your house, your neighborhoods, your spaces. Even and build up your crystal wards, your crystal access points, your wards, your sigils, your walls, whatever it is that you use to protect yourself. Find ways to share that and share it on my pages. Let me know what you use to try to protect yourself. I'd like to know. We'll talk more about how we can start to get ready for what is appearing to be a spiritual war. Not one the pagans have declared or even wanted, are all of us diverse people who do not want to be simply a slave. Yeah, because that's what they're offering, slavery of some sort. The restoration of spiritual slavery. We'll talk about We'll talk about spiritual ownerships here soon. Um, so begin the process of not letting their thoughts, their energy, their wills permeate yours. Be aware of them, but learn to live in your own energy and begin thinking of ways to make yourself feel safer and more protected in your own spaces and the spaces around you. And that is our first step. If we can't feel safe in our spaces, if we can't build our energy to our spaces, if we can't begin putting those layers of magic against us, then you are at conflict. Because if you can't find peace, if you cannot restore peace, you're at conflict. So, are we at spiritual war, Samantha? I don't know. Yes and no, always because we're witches and pagans and magic users, right? Um, but some people feel like now it's starting to get mad because they are calling out witches, they're calling out drag queens, they're calling out, um, they're going after any form of expression. They're going after books, they're going after psychology, they're going after racism. So we're actually in a war of some sort, obviously of a spiritual war, and you only can call it a spiritual war. It's about our souls and our mind. What do we going to learn and what we're going to do it? Do you know people in North Korea do not know they're oppressed? It's literally not in their language. When they come onto the country, the United States, or to even South Korea, or anywhere outside of them, they have to learn what the word oppressed means because they don't have that word. It doesn't exist. That's what spiritual psychological warfare looks like. In their language, they just simply eliminated it. And so we're seeing that happening right now to eliminate the language to keep people from using it, from people from full expression. So are we at spiritual war? There are a lot of Christians who believe that they are conducting a spiritual war. There's a lot of individuals, millions of individuals in the United States who think that the demonic forces are out to take them out. And they're beginning to react to those ideas and blame us as a community for the beginnings of it. And we are seeing those sort of conflicts. We saw it where there's more and more protest energies coming out, where more and more events are being challenged. Hmm? Yeah, I agree with it. That's something I do. I agree to a large point, yeah, that we're more interested internally than externally, and that's always been true. That has been a very true part of our community. We've always been that way, um, right from the beginning, and I suspect it's one of the biggest flaws within pagan thought is the idea of the individual supreme individualism over everything, including deity, even the divine, even over service. Paganism at the core is an individualistic belief. You have to accept it for yourself and individualized, and that makes it hard to find groups. I'm very fortunate in that I that's what I work in, and we do find groups through various methodologies and various ways of doing it, usually by finding common ground. But the truth is, paganism has a strong individual streak. We're a lot more like badgers than a pride of lions. We're not a pride of lions. We don't stick together that well, but we are badgers. We're really, really tough individually, and almost nothing can bother us. But we don't work together. We don't work well with other badgers. So we're learning that. That's a process we're going to have to learn, or we simply get wiped out. I mean, that's historically the answer. If nobody says, "Oh, we'll never do that," well, we'll just get wiped out because that's the end result of it. If we never can find a way to find enough cooperation to build our resources, to build our protections, and to maintain our rights together, because we're too individualized, then we'll all be wiped out. We'll all go to extinct. We've seen that with all sorts of pesky little animals that have gone our way. There are so many animals humanity puts extinct, and they can put and how many different levels of thought they put extinct. Hmm? Um, yeah, I'm going to contradict you. I don't know. And then there will be we'll be back and have to pick all the pieces again. Yeah, but I'm not sure we're going to have all the pieces again. I'm not sure we're not entering a new critical phase that if we do lose, this is going to be my amygdalin marketing for you. This is my fear conspiracy that if we lose this battle this time around, that I'm not sure it's not going to take a very long time for us allowed to speak again. I do think that we're coming to a point where the level of control of the mass entity, the egregor of humanity, will have more control than just the individual. So I think we have to really get together now if we really want to protect some of our rights. Or yeah, we pick the parts about it and with even better sensors. Because every time they go around, they're going to build better sensors. They're going to build better ways to keep the words away from us. We are going to lose parts of the language we don't know about. Like Rosa Parks moved on the bus because she was because she refused to be inconvenienced. Textbook. Not, oh, wait. She was being forced to do so because of her race, and it was against the law, and she refused to be treated any less than a human being. Real story, right? How about if a generation from now they don't know that? That's already happened in Florida. Hi, Jade. So that is spiritual warfare. Let me give it to you in a sec. What is spiritual warfare? It is the use of spiritual energy as a group, and through this, conjuring on divine energy first to create a central place of argument, of display, of conflict. And there we go. And then taking that energy, building it, first to bless yourselves, to bring your energy together, to give you the spiritual weapons you need, and then to project it outward to what you believe is your enemy. This is the tradition of Christian warfare. So they use prayers, they use all sorts of things. Then they get themselves riled up, and then they go enter the world, usually to do protests or other work, as these spiritual warriors, seeing the world as its enemy, that we're all full. Anyone who doesn't agree with them are full of devils and demons, and that they're allowed to take it. And the biggest danger is eventually they feel they have a right to physically act on it. Whereas in the pagan world, the spiritual warriors and warriors are people who are growing energy, learning how to defend ourselves, and taking these magical practices and using it to protect their own people. And there we go. And now maybe we're going to have to learn how to be a little bit more offensive against groups that are basically critically attacking us. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but that is what's happening. And yes, there are groups out there, Christian groups, who are beginning to make their focus pagans. And I think one of the biggest areas we're seeing this going to happen is Tennessee. I think Tennessee and Nashville area, particularly, and in and around the Nashville area, is going to be a hot flash, flash in the pan. That's going to be where I think you're going to see the sort of religious groups, these sort of preachers who are going to then use their words, which are spelling, to kind of start to make the dark world appear. And that when they make the dark world appear, they're going to point to us and saying where dark world is, and that will give them a permission to attack us. When that happens, are we going to be ready to respond back? All right, folks, that's my rant for the day. That's spiritual warfare. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact me. And check out my page. I have lots and lots of books coming up for sale. I continue to rise it. We've done pretty well. We've raised more than $1,000 to kind of for our main project of moving down to Danville, and we hope to do better. So, all right, blessed be, folks, and good night.